welcome to Casually Dressed Deep Conversation with me, Greg Chalmers, and this big unkept floppy dog here, Christopher Shields. How you doing, mate?
How you doing, man? I was going to say I was having a big hair competition with myself, but guest has formally stumped me on that.
David Ginola downstairs.
Formally beaten on that account. Apart from that, mate, apart from having hair envy, I'm all good, mate.
It looks like singing a Bon Jovi tribute band. It's brilliant, man. I love that. Anyway, guys, so the person we're talking about, as we've not introduced him yet, is drug reform advocate Thomas Delaney. How you doing, Thomas?
Yeah, I'm really good, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
I'm glad to hear it, mate. I'm glad to hear it. How have you been getting on with COVID and lockdown and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, I actually got sort of released from rehab in February not last year, 2020. So I sort of got set back into the real wild west during the first lockdown. So I think the first lockdown happened in March, and I left rehab, I think, on the 5th of February. So I went straight out of isolation back into isolation, but being in the real world, which I thought would have bothered me probably more than what it did, but at the time it didn't. I focused on renovating my apartment and sort of getting my shit together. So for the first two lockdowns, didn't really bother me, but the third one certainly did. Massively affected me, especially in terms of my recovery and not being able to go and see my family or go out and see friends or do things with loved ones. It's very I'm quite isolated. Being in Scotland, like I live 300 miles away from my family and obviously a lot of my friends that I've known for a very long time. So the sort of recovery scene that I was involved with, unfortunately, a lot of people took a massive hit, into some of them quite literally. And I didn't mean that was a pun, but I'll go with that anyway. Yeah. So unfortunately, a lot of people in sort of my game relapsed, and some of those people unfortunately died and lost their lives as well, which is tragic. But for me, I tend to keep my recovery quite personal. So my recovery is my recovery. It's no one else's. I don't really try and emulate anyone else. All the stuff that I do is the stuff that I love and that I've sort of built myself with the help of people that have been through my journey at the beginning. So the other two, like the first two lockdowns, didn't really particularly bother me, but the third one certainly did. I was extremely depressed, even suicidal, which is still quite embarrassing. Like, I know, like, mental health is such a big thing, and so is addiction, especially in Scotland. But I still have that apprehension to say that, I'm struggling, and even though I've shared my story across the world, and I'm sort of well known for talking about my addiction and sort of talking about being in a very dark and miserable, depressing place, which I'm fine when I talk about addiction. It doesn't particularly frighten me, but then sometimes I still have that stigma towards mental health myself, and I'm like, well, it's not actually cool to say like I'm depressed or I thought about killing myself this morning or something like that. Like I still have that apprehension, and that I think that's probably a huge part of the problem, that we are scared to talk about things, especially mental health, and it's always for fear of judgment. And mental health, especially in today's day and age, it's extremely prevalent. There's all sorts of factors that affect our mental health, and I think being isolated at the moment with lockdown and being restricted and having your freedom taken away from you, it can be, it can have a detrimental impact to your health, especially your mental health. Most of the time it was all right, but sort of I just can't wait for it to get over and done with. So looking forward to whatever the future has in store. Hopefully it won't be as shit as the past year.
Well, I totally see where you're coming from. I think a lot of people who have a predisposition for mental illness it has been magnified, God knows how many, because of this, and I think there are people out there who maybe didn't realise that they had issues, that have discovered that maybe not everything in the garden is as rosy as they thought it was,
That's the problem, you see. It's like, it is so difficult to talk about because I think we fear, like it's stigmatized, completely stigmatized. And it is weird because I think addiction is more stigmatized than mental health. However, I'd be much more comfortable talking about addiction than I would be mental health sometimes. So it's a bit of, it's a bit unusual for me to feel like that as well. But Yeah, I think one thing in terms of like the last lockdown for me, it's given me a lot of time to reflect. I mean, not everybody's used it like that, I know, but for me, I really thought about who I want to be and what I want to do with the rest of my life. So for that, I'm grateful for it. Although I can't sort of get way back to whatever this normal will be, but yeah, just sort of want it all over to be done with, I guess, like the rest of the world.
Yeah. So for anybody who is not familiar with your story, like, can you give us we'll just start from the beginning and let us know what the hell's been going on?
It all happened when I was about 2-year-old, and so I always feel like I'm talking to a psychiatrist or something like that. But yeah, so despite my horrid northern English accent, I'm actually Irish. So I was born in Limerick, but I'm from a town called Nina in County Tipperary, and I moved during the 80s. I was born in 1986, and I think sort of London in particular had a massive wave of immigration, especially from people from Ireland. And my mum and dad were together at the time. I wouldn't necessarily say they were happy together, but I'm sure there was parts of their life where they obviously shared some sort of happiness. And we moved to London. There was just myself and my mum and my dad. And then they had 2 more children, my 2 brothers, Patrick and Sean. And unfortunately, growing up in London, for me in particular, and probably my brothers as well, including my mum, it wasn't particularly happy. Like we always have this preconceived idea of what a happy family should be, and your mum and dad should be together for all of your life, and you know your dad should be a doctor and your mum should be whatever your percentage is, but they've both got very successful careers, and you know you're brought up in this environment where you're actually loved and nurtured correctly. We all have these sort of expectations of what a family should look like, even from a very early age, and unfortunately my family wasn't that at all. My dad, unfortunately, still to this day, is a raging addict. He's an alcoholic, a chronic gambler, a very violent, nasty and abusive man. And I've not spoken to my father in years. And I've never really had a relationship that you sort of imagine you're going to have with your dad when you're a child. You know, most people look at the dad in particular, I'd imagine, and think that they're their sort of hero and, you know, that's the role model in their life. And my dad was probably one of the worst role models that any human being could have. And my mum, especially during my early childhood, my mum was very protective over us. So, for example, like I grew up in an environment where domestic violence and abuse was an everyday occurrence. So it wasn't just the fact that like my dad was an alcoholic and constantly gambling and wasting all our money and being in the pub and being away from home. But when he came back from the pub, it was an absolute monster. And I can remember even as a child, like when I was around about 6 or 7 years old, my dad attacked my mum and I tried to intervene and stop him. And I can remember biting his sort of his hand, and he pretty much knocked my mum out in front of me. And I can remember trying to attack him and biting him, which was the only thing that I could do. And he came back from the pub that night to actually get money out of my mum. So my mum used to stash money away each week. And it wasn't like copious amounts of money. There was probably like 10, 20, 30 quid, which she managed to hide. And every Sunday she would go to Tesco's, she would drag us along, and she would literally buy everything in Tesco's at the reduced price. And that would feed us for the rest of the week. And that's how difficult our lives were. But I remember on that specific occasion, when my dad attacked my mum and I tried to stop him, my mum was decorating, which I think was a way of my mum coping. My mum always was painting a wall or wallpaper and something. And I think that was her sort of form of therapy. And my dad grabbed me and battered me and covered me in turpentine and tried to set me on fire in front of my mum and kill me. To extract 20 quid off my mum. I mean, that's not the worst thing I've witnessed my dad do either. My dad was horrible, and I hate saying that as well, you know. But he was, and I imagine he probably still is. But yeah, so that was like. Now that didn't happen every week, but there was constant times in my life where my dad would batter me, batter my mum literally every day. And like one of my happiest memories as a child was when my dad attacked my mum, and my mum actually ran into the kitchen and grabbed a knife and held it to his throat against the fridge and told him if he didn't leave right there and then that she would kill him. And if she didn't kill him there and then, she would literally slit his throat in his sleep. Now, as a 6-7-year-old child, you know, when you're asked at school like happy memories and stuff like that, for me, that's something obviously I don't want to discuss in class for fear of what people would probably do.
Miss, you'll never guess what.
Yeah.
You're like, fucking hell.
Yeah, so it's, you know, my childhood was extremely chaotic, extremely violent, deeply traumatizing. And, you know, I never had I never really particularly had a nurturing environment. My mum always tried her best to bring us up and to do what she needed to do to survive. But my mum fortunately found the courage and strength to leave my dad, which I really admire my mum for. And we moved from London. It was actually the day Princess Diana died, which is how I remember it because it was all over the news. And we moved to Barnsley, which is this sort of accent now. And I remember that was our escapism. My dad stayed in London and we moved to Barnsley. But unfortunately, as many addictions as my dad has, my mum also has her addictions. And that's not drugs, it's not alcohol. But she picks this sort of carbon copy version of this man. And that really upsets me because to me now, especially going through treatment and going through rehab and sort of studying the things that I study, I understand that my mum does things because of her own beliefs, her own self-esteem and how she views herself. So she has issues, can I say, in regards to choosing men. So every boyfriend or long-term relationship that the woman's ever had is, the man's always exactly the same: abusive, violent, fucking mental health problems through the roof, drunk. The variety of men, just appalling, you know, very sort of the wrong end of the spectrum with addiction. And I know there's no sort of thing as a good addict or a bad addict, but in terms of if you was to put it on a spectrum, then they would definitely be at the bad end of the spectrum. And unfortunately, that was the type of men that we grew up with all of our lives. And, you know, they were all extremely abusive towards me and my brothers. They battered us. And I actually ran away quite a lot as a child, and I moved away. And, you know, I was quite, for me, like when you talk to most people and they talk about their childhood, they probably moan about going to school and, oh God, I hated school. I hated so-and-so. And for me, I absolutely loved school because school was the only way, school was the only place I knew that I wouldn't get battered. Even if I was a little bit cheeky to a teacher who I would see as an adult, especially a male teacher, I knew that I could be cheeky with them and they wouldn't hit me back. So I was extremely intelligent at school, but I was also quite, I wouldn't say particularly naughty, but I was a bit of a class clown. I was always doing stuff for attention. I was always acting out. I didn't find particularly the lessons that we were learning very difficult. Academically, I was quite gifted in most subjects, and but I did piss about a lot. And for me, looking back now, I understand why I did that. But in terms of school itself, I absolutely love school. Why would I not? You know, I wasn't fearful. I wasn't around screaming and shouting. I wasn't around battering, you know, mentally and physical abuse. I wasn't around any of that. So for me, school was quite exciting. You know, it was quite, it was my place of solace.
Safe zone, wasn't it?
Yeah, totally. But there's a lot of research now, especially that goes into trauma and ACEs, and there's a thing called flight or fight response, which I'm sure you're probably very familiar with. And there's a lot of scientific research now that's taking place that actually proves, and there's a correlation between people that go through extreme sort of events of trauma, like I guess I did. And flight or fight, you know, that response mode is fantastic if you're in the woods and you see a bear and you can either decide to try and fight it, which would be stupid to do so, or run, you know. And unfortunately, I've never seen a bear in the woods, but every single day at 3:00, my body would instinctively go into that flight or fight response, because at 3:00, I knew we'd be finishing in 15 minutes. I'd have to catch the bus home. And with my stepdad then in particular, I never knew what I was coming home for. You know, I didn't know. And my stepdad didn't necessarily hit my mum, but he did us, you know. So it was a little bit different, where the violence then in the past with my dad, it was more towards my mum and obviously us as well, but it was more probably directed towards my mum, because she took that, so we didn't take it. And but then my stepdad at the time, he was extremely abusive mentally as well. Like, the stuff he used to do was horrific. You know, I wouldn't wish that upon anybody, especially like an innocent young child. And so my body used to be constantly in that flight or fight, that fear mode every single day. Going home on the bus, I wouldn't talk very much, or some days I might piss about to try and distract myself. And then as soon as I got off that bus, I knew that I was walking home, and that's where the trouble was going to start. So for me, I used to try and get detention as much as possible. Because even if I knew I'd get a beating at the end of it, I knew that it would only be maybe 7, 8 o'clock at night till I went to bed, as opposed to being from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock at night, for example. And it, you know, it's depressing as it sounds. You know, there was times in my childhood where I did have good times, you know, like I mentioned at school, and I would try and play out or just roam the streets as much as possible, purely to get away from all the drama that was happening at home. And there's a thing, especially with children, and I think of all generations, not just my generation or the new ones, but we don't talk about our problems at home. You know, it's sort of bred into us from a very early age that what happens at home stays at home. Yeah. So I would dread to think about telling my teachers what would go off at home, because I was also sort of scared of being removed from my family and being possibly put into care. You know, and I don't necessarily think, from some of the people that I've met, especially in rehab, I don't think the care system's always a safe environment either. So for me, I was always growing up in this environment until I was around about 16, 17, and I moved out, and I moved back to London for a good few years. And I never started taking drugs until I was 17, almost 18. I didn't really take to alcohol because I'd seen what alcohol had done to all the male role models in my life. So my father, my stepfather, my mum's boyfriends, and so on. And to me, I assumed if you drank, you ended up a cunt, to put it frankly. You know, I assume that you can edit that out if you want that word. But
that's all right, mate. Say it again if you want.
It doesn't sound as bad as Scottish people say. And but I did. I assumed if you drank, you ended up like that. So for me, I never sort of drank. I wasn't one of those kids that drank on a school field. You know, I didn't really get involved with drinking until I started going out, which was around about 17 or 18. And I always looked about 12-year-old, even till I was about 20. So for me to go out drinking was, I mean, I bought a fake ID and all that, but it was extremely difficult to go out and get served. So I found that whole experience quite difficult. But I got introduced to drugs when I was about 17, and I'd always hated drugs. I was always really against it. You know, I'd seen firsthand what alcohol did to my dad and everyone else sort of in that role throughout my life. So for me, alcohol wasn't a thing that I really wanted to pursue. But unfortunately, drugs were. So the first drug that I took was cocaine. And I genuinely thought I would die from sniffing it. I never knew anything about it. I used to hang around with some kids that were slightly older than me. Well, it's not slightly, but a few years older than me. You know, and they would what you'd be classed as like the cool kids that go out, all the birds would be all over them, you know, all in the latest gear and everything like that. And I always wondered why they sort of pulled birds and why they were so popular. And, you know, to me, that sort of lifestyle was very appealing. And I'd go out and I'd got into that sort of culture of going out and taking drugs and not going home all weekend, because for me, I didn't want to be at home. Yeah. And that's not to say that, you know, I didn't take drugs and instantly turn into a rage and drug addict, like the guy that I ended up turning into when I went into rehab. You know, for a couple of years, a good few years, I absolutely fucking loved taking drugs. You know, I loved it. It was part of the whole sort of alluring aspects of going out and enjoying a few lines of coke before we went out, getting ready, you know, having a few. And I used to drink, but not very often. I'd have a couple of summer comforts and lemonade, and then the majority of the night I would probably drink lemonade or whatever was thrown in front of me, apart from when people used to think we're bowlers and walk around with bottles of champagne, and you know, not knowing that was like my last bit of money that I had to pay and walking around thinking I'm a fucking millionaire. And but yeah,
been there, buddy.
We've all got them pictures with like stupid.
Mate, I've been at my worst. I remember being on a night out and I bought 2 bottles of Moe and I drank one and poured the other one out as I was drinking the other one. Just an absolute idiot.
You're a dick.
But I know, mate. I know.
But chicks dig it, you do it, and you have all these women
some real big dick,
it's like,
big dick energy, mate. Isn't it?
Makes your penis about 20 inches bigger than what it is.
That's a big dick energy, mate.
Yeah, so it was, all of that, like, and I'm not trying to glamorize it or glorify it in any way, but, at an early age, sort of my late teens, early 20s, I enjoyed going out and doing it. And when I lived in London, although I hate it when someone says, "Oh, my addiction was manageable," because purely on that definition, if you've got an addiction, then it's never manageable. But it was. I had a very good job working in London, and I'd probably go out maybe on a couple of dates a month, or I might go out with a bunch of mates maybe once a month. And that was it. I'd go out and I would literally spend Friday, Saturday, Sunday, probably book the Monday off work to die and recover on the Monday. And, and that was fine. I never really thought of it as a problem. And in London, it's weird if you don't take drugs, especially when you go out, it's everywhere. And that was fine for a few years. And then I moved back to Barnsley, and then I got involved in ketamine. So I was always shit scared of ketamine. I have a lot of friends that unfortunately are still addicted to this stuff. And, it's just an absolutely disgusting drug. Like all drugs. And, but I was always terrified of it because, like, my objective at that age was to go out, enjoy myself and pull a bird, or like 20. Yeah. And that was fine. I'd go out and I'd pull and I'd go out dancing and have a laugh and just get up to mischief. And I enjoyed that. But then when I saw my mates on ketamine, they'd have a few keys and they'd be like a zombie in the corner or being carried out of nightclubs. And I used to look at them and be like, oh, fucking hell, like what are they doing? Like I'd see some of my friends, and one of them in particular, really good looking guy, chiseled cheekbones, beautiful, looks like a supermodel. And he'd have loads of birds swarming all over him. And then he'd take ket and he'd come like walking around like a zombie, and they'd all just be like, oh my God, look at the state of him. And I'd be like, what the fuck are you doing? Like you were in there and now you've been fucking took to A&E. So I never really understood the idea of ketamine until I tried it. And then once I tried it, I became instantly hooked, completely and utterly hooked. And I think I did it for many reasons. I did it initially because it was cheaper than Coke, considerably. And I kind of liked the effect of it. There's a fine line between taking it and sort of feeling a bit woozy and a bit like, oh, this is a bit spacey, and then being proper fucked and like dribbling in a corner, pissing your pants. There's a very fine line, and unfortunately I spent probably most of it on the opposite end, in the corner pissing my pants. And it makes you feel incredibly drunk, and I think that's why a lot of people do it, because it literally just fucks you straight away. And you can take Coke and it'll bring you around a little bit, depending on obviously how good the Coke is, and depending on how good the ketamine is. But a lot of people mix it. When I first initially took it, I don't know what it's called everywhere else, but we call it CK. So it was like cocaine and ketamine. Yeah. And at first I was like, I don't feel anything. I'm fine. And then I just took like ketamine on its own, and then I literally can't remember the night. And then, like in those early days, a gram used to probably last me and two of my mates like 2 nights out, until I ended up. And I hate saying this because I never viewed myself as a drug dealer, but I became involved in dealing drugs. And I think when you start taking drugs, whether you want to admit it or whether you know it or not, you might sort your mates out, Then that's how it got. I never had ambitions at school of being a drug dealer or anything like that. I still frown upon it now, but I'd look at drug dealers and think, nah, I wouldn't want to be like you. But I used to sort some out for my friends, and then I realized, if I buy an ounce, I could sell 20, 25 gram, keep 3 or 4. Obviously, once you've underweighed it by like 0.7s to everybody, you end up with like 4 or 5 gram to yourself. And I did that for a few months, and then I sort of was at a party one night, and this kid was talking about like I could have quantities and quantities, and and you think everyone chats shit at parties anyway, and you're like, yeah, of course you can, yeah. And then some of my friends were quite big time dealers, and then they were struggling to get some stuff, and then I sort of remembered this guy at a party, so I contacted him, and I went from dealing or selling a few grams, maybe an ounce a week, to sort of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 kilos a week, week in, week out, constantly. And like the bigger amounts that I was dealing in, I was making a considerable amount of profit per kilo, and being the sly dog that I am, getting sort of backhanders, and I was making money on top, but then I was saying to them, well, I'm not making anything on it. If they're watching this now, they're going to fucking kill me. I'd be like, well, I'm not making anything on it. And I'd be making a lot. And then they'd give me like 2 or 3 ounces as well, which I'd sell as well as, or keep for a personal stash. And the money I was making was astronomical. And I'm talking like thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds a week in, week out for months. And that sort of stage of my life, I never viewed myself as a drug dealer. I was just a guy that used to love going out, getting ketty, and sort of lived sort of life to the fullest. But obviously with a very apparent massive addiction. And that all, I say tragically ended, but I'm actually really grateful for how it ended. And I lived with 2 of my friends, and one of my friends was a big drug dealer as well, and he dealt in everything, whereas I tended to specialize just in ketamine. And we got set up. The property that we rented got robbed a few times, and on this one occasion, I've been climbing off my face on ketamine. I was climbing a quarry called EM Quarry, the Horseshoe Quarry. So I was climbing probably about 100 or so meters high on a rope with my mate belaying. So I don't know if you know about climbing belaying. Yeah. So the guy who's belaying was fucked out his face on ketamine as well. I'm halfway up, and I had this thing of I tug on the rope 4 times. That means like that for him would mean I'm going to have a line. So he'd stop, he'd take my weight, and then I'd sniff ketamine. And I was on acid as well. And I would climb like seriously quite difficult routes full of ketamine. Not a fear in the world, And my mate, half the time, he probably didn't even have the rope. And I was climbing all day. In the summer, it was beautiful. Really loved that day, despite the dangers. But you don't think about that when you're trapped in addiction. You don't give a shit. And I went back home. It was a Wednesday night, I think, and all my friends were going out. And I was like, normally I was the first one to get ready and go out, but because I'd been climbing all day, I was exhausted. So I said, nah, I might go out. I'm not too sure. Our house was like a party house. Everybody went out. I locked the door, or my friend locked the door as he left, my housemate. And then I went and got a bath. And I was at this point in my life, like sniffing an ounce a day, easy. Like I was sniffing. I would do like a gram in the bath. I would do a gram whilst the bath was running. I would do a gram watching a film just to get ready and sat down for a film. Like I could remember sniffing like meter lines and stuff like that. I was renowned for sniffing a lot of ketamine, which isn't a good. It's not a very great way to be introduced. Like, this is Tom. He can sniff copious amounts of ket. What? And I'd be like, there's an ounce. Boom, gone. But I did, and it wasn't even shit ketamine. It was really good stuff as well. And like my tolerance to ketamine was really, really stupidly high. And on this occasion, I was in the bath, sniffing ketamine, watching a film, and then there was a knock at the door, which was really weird. So no one ever knocked at our door, and our door was never locked either. And I went downstairs, and a towel unlocked the door. I thought, this is unusual. Someone's forgot the key or something like that. And as I unlocked the door, just as I pulled the handle down and the door opened about an inch, it just got smashed back in my face, knocked me flying into the kitchen. And the towel fell off as well. And so I was stark bullet naked with a guy there holding a gun to my face, telling me that he's going to kick the shit out of me, he's going to batter me, and I need to give him my stuff. And so I was like, what the fuck's happening here? And like when you're on ketamine, you've got no sense of reality. Like you genuinely have no idea. So I was like, am I dreaming this? Like, is this actually happening? And he sort of slapped me around the face with a gun, and I was like, wait, this is real. And then I was start bullet naked. Thankfully at the time I had quite a fit body. So I wasn't that ashamed.
He wasn't fat shaming you.
No, I was fit. I mean, it was a cold bath as well. I was doing like the Wim Hof water therapy.
Oh, yeah. So Ket Dick.
Yeah. I was like, oh, this isn't always like this, I promised.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I tried to be quite coy, and I thought, right. So I knew exactly what he was there for. And it wasn't for me, it was actually for my friend's stuff. So I took him into my bedroom where I probably had an ounce or so just fucking laid on this bedside table. And I went, that's it. And he went, don't, he goes, look, I'm not fucking stupid. And he said my name. He was like, Tom, well, everyone calls me Delaney. And he went, look, I know what's here. And I was like, the fuck? Like, it was really weird because he even knew the layout of the house. But when you're being held hostage and, you know, you've got a gun pointed at your face, you're not trying to analyze everything else. You're actually like shitting your pants. So I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. This is everything. Like, and I was shit scared. You know, I'm not a fucking gangster. I'm not a psychopath. I'm not hard. But a lot of my friends growing up were those type of people. So I was sort of well looked after. And I kind of knew that as well. But no matter, you know, how big and hard you are or how big and hard your friends are, there's always some stupid idiot out there that's prepared to rob you. You know, and when you're in that sort of game, no one's your friend, not really. So this guy knew what was there. And I took him into the living room, and there was kilos of the stuff under the table, and quite a lot of thousands of pounds worth of money. So he took the stuff and then sort of went back into my friend's bedroom and asked me to empty his drawers. So as I was emptying his drawers, I was screaming, you know, I was crying my eyes out. I was shit scared. And he left. And I phoned one of my friends, and my friend came back, and he was like, my friend at the time was a bit of a dick. And I love him to bits. He's still my friend today. You know, I meet him a lot. He doesn't do the things that he does now or that he did then. You know, he's turned his life around as well. And he was like, oh, it's fuck it. It's only money. I'll get it back tomorrow. And in fairness, like, you know, he did. Money was nothing. Like, it wasn't. And the guy took, I think, about 4 or 5 kilos of ket, about, I don't know, £7,000 or £8,000 in cash. And then these pills, I don't even know what these fucking pills, I can't even remember what these pills were, but he took them as well. And I didn't know, but the driver actually arranged, so what actually happened, we got set up. So the driver owed my friend money, and he'd arranged with my friend, he was like, look, I know I owe you money, but I've got money for another few kilos. Can I buy that? And then what I'll do is I'll make the money back to pay you. So my mate wasn't thinking, oh, he's going to set me up. And he did what he asked. So they knew that there was that amount of kilo. You know, they knew what was there. And they also knew that that day was predominantly when we got rid of a lot of stuff. So we knew that there'd be a shitload of cash. And they got pulled by the police about 100 meters away from the flat that we lived in, the apartment. And the reason why they got pulled, because they robbed us late at night, and the guy that was driving was Ketty, and he didn't have his lights turned on. So the police pulled him. So obviously the guy ran out, dropped his gun, fucking cash went everywhere, drugs was everywhere. And rather than them turning around and saying it's all ours, which is what any sort of criminal with half a brain cell would have done, they turned around and went, oh, we just fucking robbed it from this guy's house. So then the list of charges that was held against them was a lot more than just being in possession of a firearm and drugs with intent to supply and all of that. Then they also got done for, well, armed robbery and sort of all the criminal stuff that implicates them in that as well. And for me, it was horrible because I was the only witness. So I went, that night was one of the worst nights of my life. And I went to my friend's house, and I just sat there all night getting kitty, crying my eyes out, thinking that people were after me, people were going to kill me. Really, none of my mates hardly really gave a fuck. You know, they were all out partying. One of my friends even took a bird back to our apartment and was with a bird in my bed while I'm at my other mates crying my eyes out after what had just happened. Like, you know, they're not those sort of people. a lot of them weren't my friends. They were just dickheads that I took drugs with. Do you know what I mean? And sold them drugs and all of that shit that you get involved in. So, I got, obviously, the police was there the next day and I denied it. You know, I just said, look, I've been climbing all day yesterday. I've just got back. I don't know what happened. I've got no idea. Just played stupid, which I got away with. And then they came back a few hours later and they arrested me. And my friend, whose drugs it were, they told him basically, yeah, it was my drugs. I've been set up. That's what's happened. The only thing he's got to do with it, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. They weren't his drugs. And then obviously the guys that arranged it all, they went to prison, and my friend went to prison as well. But at the time, ketamine was only a Class C drug, so it wasn't. I think it's a Class B drug now, but at the time it wasn't that bad. So they only got a couple of years, and I think even with good behaviour, they never got that long. And the guy that actually robbed me, the guy with the gun, enters UK strongman competitions. So he's a unit. Like he's not tall, but he's a big, mean-looking, nasty guy. And I've bumped into him since, and I didn't actually recognise him, but like because it was so traumatising. When I saw him, I felt sick. Mm-hmm. I was like, what the fuck? And then he was in the gym, and like I'd have been fucked like if he'd have snapped me in half. And I was like, shit. And he came to me and he talked to me and he apologised. He says, look, I'm really sorry about that. It wasn't actually you that I meant to rob. It was your mate. You know, you just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And ironically, the guy, the getaway driver, fucking idiot, you know, he's reached out since asking me for help to get him into recovery. And I was a bit in two minds at first when that happened because I was like, no, fuck you. You know, you made my life hell for years. And then I thought, well, do you know what? I did a lot of things that I wasn't proud of. I never robbed anybody or held a gun to anyone's head or set anybody up like that. But, you know, there's things. I was a drug dealer. I'm not proud of that. So I did. I gave him some advice and we sort of keep in touch and stuff. I mean, we're not best mates, you know. Yeah. He doesn't come round to my house and stuff like that.
It's not exactly a solid foundation for
he doesn't drive me about.
Yeah. He's now an Uber driver.
I mean, he could deliver me a takeaway tonight, actually. I won't provide. But yeah, it's like, you know, I sort of don't begrudge him anymore. And forgiveness is a huge part of recovery, although I say that, you know, there's a lot of things that I can't forgive my dad for, ironically. But yeah, so that phase of my life.
Do you think that's because you're maybe closer to you, or I say closer, but do you think it's probably just by association you're closer to your dad than you would be like an associate, somebody you knew who'd set you up?
I think, to be honest, I think it's because of the stuff that my dad's done that regardless of being an addict or not, I don't think there's things that you can do. Like there was a lot of things that I did when I was an addict, and I used to compare myself to my dad, and be like, oh, you know, and I ended up being my dad in the sense of being an absolute addict. You know, I didn't hit women, I didn't do a lot of other stuff that he did, but I was still an addict. You know, I ended up turning into the bloke that I despised. And when that hit, you know, when I realised what I'd become, that was a huge catalyst for me getting better as well. But yeah, like with my dad, there's just certain things that I can't forgive, especially when he's still trapped in addiction, you know, and while he's still using and, drinking, which is a drug, while ever he's still doing that, you know, I find it very difficult to forgive him. And that's one thing I may regret in the future. Who knows, you know, with time, maybe I can, maybe I can't. You know, there's a lot of work that I've still got to do every single day around that sort of stuff. But for right now, I don't have a relationship with my dad, you know, and my dad to me is dead, and it's easier that way. As tragic as that sounds, you know, and there's a lot of pain when I say that because I feel it, you know, but for me right now, that is the best sort of way of dealing with it, you know. And you know, I'm not Gandhi. You know, I don't claim to be like, oh, I can forgive everybody, because there's some things that I can't, you know. And I'd be as much to punch my dad straight in the face if I saw him as I would be to hug him, you know. And that's the sort of relationship we've got. But yeah, when that happened, like the robbery, I went back to Ireland, and oddly enough, I stayed with my dad for one night. And then I moved out the next day and went and lived with my uncle. And I stayed in Ireland for about 18 months. Stopped taking drugs. I think I used drugs probably about 3 times, which was when I came back. Mostly, I used it once in Ireland, which was like fet. And I snorted it, and it was horrible. And then I used ketamine when I came back to Barnsley for a holiday, which I think was for my birthday. And I probably drank 3 or 4 times. But apart from that, I was relatively clean and healthy. Got back in shape, and then I moved back to Barnsley. And I joined this amazing company. This opportunity landed, and I worked as a sales rep, and then as I progressed, I worked in the education sector for around about 7 years. And at the end, I worked as a business development executive. I had a high flying career. I had at the time, everything that you imagine a successful person had. I had the beautiful supermodel looking girlfriend. I drove a nice car, well, an all right car. It was a Polo, but it was a new one. I lived in a swanky apartment in the Peak District. I had money. I looked all right. I was happy. Or I portrayed a life of happiness, should I say? And everybody, if I'd have wrote down, happy. Yeah, it was all glamorized. I never, and when you meet people, I can remember my girlfriend at the time. I went to a wedding, and I wasn't on drugs, and I was miserable as fuck when I went, because obviously when you're a drug addict, you want drugs all the time, and I didn't take drugs, and I resented her for a lot of not being able to take drugs. And no one ever asks when they meet you, are you happy? Everyone says, oh, what do you do for a living? And that's their way of analysing you and sort of putting you in this social, having a social structure and sort of placing you within it. And that's, no one ever asks you, are you happy? We all have to justify ourselves and say, oh, well, this is what I do for a living. And, a lot of people are quite, satisfied with what I did for a living, because I had a fantastic career. I used to sit there and I'd be like, oh, I'm a business development executive, and they'd be like, what's that? And I'd be like, well, I basically work in the education sector, and I create dreams for children, which is sort of what I did. I never said, well, when I'm not doing that, I'm sniffing about fucking 7 grams of ketamine a day. I'm going missing from my girlfriend for about 3 weeks at a time. I was unfaithful. I was a dick, an absolute dick. But I never was violent, so I used to justify that to myself. I'd be like, right, I've shagged another bird, but I've not beat you up. And that's mad.
It's good. That's where the baseline is.
Yeah, there's things I don't do, and there's things that I do, and and that I say it jokingly, but and I hate even admitting that I did that. I didn't hurt her physically, but emotionally and spiritually, and I did. I damaged something that could have been potentially beautiful, and a lot of my relationships, unfortunately, sort of followed suit. And I don't like that, but I'm brutally honest, and I believe in being honest, and that's why I say it. I'm not proud of it, and I know I said it with in jest, and I tried to make a laugh of it, but it's I was a dick. I was a dick. But then what happened was, like all good things that come to an end, I ended up getting made redundant. And ironically, it was nothing to do with addiction. So everybody thinks, oh, you're a drug addict, that's how you lost your job. And I was like, actually, no. No one at work knew I was a drug addict. And because I was extremely successful, I used to make millions of pounds for that company, hundreds of thousands of pounds a year in profit, millions of pounds over the time that I'd worked there. So I was never assumed, and I never really drank. So if we went to a corporate event or we went to anything like that, I wouldn't drink. I really wouldn't drink. So everybody was like, fucking hell, he's a little goody two shoes. He's really well behaved. He's really good at his job. This guy's cracked it. And all along, I'd go back to the hotel. I can remember I worked at an event with Theo Pathetis as a drug addict. The guy out of the Dragon's Den, that's worth about 600-700 million quid. And we worked at an event. There was me, a lady in the company called Ashley, who won The Apprentice. That was we were like the hotshots of the company. And then our CEO, our manager, and there was only a few of us that represented the company. We went and worked at this event with Theo. And I can remember we were all sat with him, and he invited us all to dinner. And I turned him down, which was quite stupid. And I was like, no, I'm going to go back. I've got some work to do. And, I quite enjoy, even at that point in my life, I was extremely successful, and I quite enjoyed having the limelight. I was always sort of the center of attention. And I enjoyed it. I thrived upon it. But I turned him down and I said, I'm going to go back to my hotel. I've got some work to do and I need to crack on with it. And he probably looked at me and thought, that's amazing. But what I didn't tell him was I had like half an ounce of ketamine sat in the hotel that had been sat there all day.
A long line back there, big man. It's not going to snort itself.
Yeah, I could start a line from here to the hotel room. I dread to think of where I could have ended up if I'd have not been a drug addict. But, being made redundant was for me a huge catalyst, because when I got made redundant, at the same time, I'd come out of quite a long-term relationship, which I turned absolutely toxic. That was my fault. I lost my job. I gave up. They offered me another role, which was just like a slap in the face. I turned it down. I accepted redundancy. I was due to sign a lease on my apartment that I had. I couldn't financially. I wasn't too sure if I'd be able to afford it. And for me, being made redundant, it brought up all of those feelings of how worthless and how much of a piece of shit I was. So for me, growing up all my life, I constantly felt worthless. I never felt like I belonged to anything, even my own family. I never felt like I belonged. I never felt like I fitted in. I always felt like the odd one out. And when I got made redundant, it sort of cemented in my mind all of those feelings of how worthless and how pathetic and shit I am at everything. And I took it, and I actually enjoyed dwelling in my own misery. It was, again, that's quite an addictive trait and a very dangerous one. And I went from being relatively fit and healthy, and I'd lost my apartment, I'd lost my job, I'd lost my girlfriend at the time. I sold my car to pay off a drug debt. I had to move from a beautiful apartment in the Peak District back to my mum's, which is in a bit of a shithole town, and I just felt at that point, I think I was about 30-year-old maybe, and I'd lost everything. And then I went from, I've actually got a prop, this isn't set up, I had this from earlier, but I went from being relatively fit and healthy, and then over the course of 7 months, I sort of looked like this with shorter hair, and I ended up losing about 7 stone. I had an anal prolapse, which you can Google afterwards if you don't know what they look like. I've got a picture. And when
you said you're the prop, I was like, oh.
Yeah, a diagram of a prolapse. But I did, I lost 7 stone. I was suicidal. I had many attempts at my life. I was an absolute junkie in every aspect of the word. And I sort of use the word to create shock and to really be quite hard hitting. I know it's a little bit controversial in the world of recovery if you want to use the word junkie or not. It's demonizing. But I was a junkie. There was nothing good about my life, and I'd be a fucking liar if I was like, oh yeah, it was great. It wasn't. Being a junkie is absolute hell. It's I cannot explain it unless you've lived it. And even people that try and empathize or sympathize, unless you've been at rock bottom, and you're looking, you're driving down the motorway at 100 miles an hour, racking lines of cut up, sniffing it, closing your eyes, taking your hands off the steering wheel and trying to count to 10 and hoping that you're going to crash and kill yourself. When you're in that state, weighing 6 stone, being in and out of hospital, doctors telling me I had a month to live, I'd be dead in a matter of weeks. They were due to remove my bladder because ketamine damages your bladder. So it destroys. So what it does is it stops your bladder from expanding and contracting. So your bladder constantly sends signals. Well, your brain receives signals from your bladder telling you need to wee. So I used to go for about 300 pisses a day. And I would be in so much pain. I had to have a camera down it, which was very painful. I used to be in hospital and they'd shove cameras up and in every orifice known to man. Some less painful than the others. Some a lot more embarrassing than the others. And I was dying. And I remember I woke up one morning and I remember thinking, I have 2 choices. I'm going to kill myself today and do it and really do it, or I'm going to fucking sort this out. And thankfully, I've had quite a lot of friends, unfortunately, kill themselves. And everybody says it was suicide. Well, it was suicide, but they'll say, oh, it was mental health problems. It was mental health problems. And in actual fact, you know, I was with one of my friends just, I think the day or 2 days before he hung himself. And we were at mine, sniffing ketamine, playing pool. At that point, I had a 4-bedroom house and I had a pool table because that was cool. And you wouldn't think he was, you know, you wouldn't think he was going to go home and do that. You know, he was one of the most lovable, popular, good-looking kids you'll ever meet, you know, and he killed himself because he couldn't stop taking drugs. And I understand that because I've been there. You know, and a lot of people, because of the stigma that surrounds addiction, it's much easier to say you killed yourself because of suicide and mental health problems, as opposed to actually saying, oh, he had a drug problem. Because, you know, being an addict is much more stigmatized than having a mental health problem. Mm-hmm. But in actual fact, you know, they're heavily interlinked and intertwined. So I remember having this idea one day and I was like, right, I'm actually going to fucking kill myself today or I'm going to sort this out. And I, you know, at the time I had a nephew that I used to take so much inspiration from my nephew. Even though I was still drugged up most of the time being around him, which is fucking appalling. But I used to look at him and I used to think, oh, life's amazing for that little kid. Do you know what I mean? And even though I wasn't the best of uncles in terms of having an addiction, you know, I used to take him out, you know, take him to the park and do all like the uncle stuff with him. And I loved it. And that kept me alive probably a lot longer than what I wanted. You know, and I wasn't using drugs at that stage of my life because I enjoyed it. You know, I wasn't enjoying taking drugs for probably about 5 or 6 years at this point in my life. I was taking drugs because I wanted to die. You know, I was hoping that the next line would kill me. And I didn't have the balls to kill myself. You know, it's fucking... And I'm not trying to say, oh, you know, that's really manly to do that. But you have to be in a real dark place and it does take a lot of courage. I know that sentence doesn't sound right, but it does take
I know what you mean though. I know what you mean.
You know, it's not easy to wake up and think, oh, fuck it, I'm going to kill myself today. You know, and I've had that thought and idea and I've got things ready to do it. And thankfully, I never did. And I'm extremely grateful and lucky for that. But I remember at that point then I thought, fuck it. My mum actually had a massive row with my mum. And my mum called me a junkie, which might sound really bad when you think about it. But in actual fact, I needed to be told I was a junkie. You know, and there's nothing more scary than an Irish woman telling you that you're a junkie and screaming and shouting at you. And although, like, to some of your listeners, that might sound, fucking hell, his mum was horrible. But my mum was bang on. You know, my mum needed to tell me that. And I needed to hear that because when you're a drug addict as well, like, you know, a lot of people mollycoddle and you're like, oh, it's all right. You're going to be all right. I was fucking 6 stone. How the fuck was I going to be all right? I was dying. Yeah. Oh, you're not that bad. You've got a 12-pack, you know, that's good. It's like, you know, but my mum just told me straight. And my brothers tried to intervene as well, my sister, you know. And unfortunately, when you are trapped in addiction and you're a full-on junkie, you know, drugs are first. Drugs, then drugs, money for drugs, transport for drugs, lay-ons for drugs, and then your family come about 300th down the queue, you know, and my life was completely consumed utterly by addiction. And I was extremely lucky. I went to some meetings, which was kind of like an X Factor audition, but like with no talent. My talent was taking drugs. So it was like, no,
you
Simon
sniff a meter of ket, man. That's some talent.
Like all the X's, blah, blah. And
golden buzzer.
Yeah, all the confetti falling down.
Just bags.
Just wee bags of ket.
Got shipped out to Spain to the judges' houses and stuff.
Brilliant.
You know, it wasn't. It was bizarre. And I had to go through this interview selection process, and it was like I had to. And I remember when I went to this meeting, and I looked at the guy straight in his eyes, and I went, "Look, I need rehab, and this is why I need rehab." And I just offloaded, and I told him everything. And he was like, "I've never met anybody that's come to me and tried to make excuses and just said, look, this is what I want, and this is why." So I think they saw something in me straight away. And I sort of got like fast tracked through that process. So I had an interview. I was sat in front of 2 people and my key worker. And they asked me a bunch of questions and I was properly fucked at this stage of my life. Mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically. And I cried. You know, I told them everything, or a lot of stuff, and I gave them the reasons as to why I needed to go to rehab. And I sort of assured them that if they sent me, because like rehab isn't cheap, and I think they gave me, I contributed a small bit, but then they also gave me probably in excess of 20. I actually don't know what they gave me, but if I work it out, probably about £25,000. Not and stupidly, I was like, "So do you transfer it into my bank?" So the last thing you want to do to a junkie is give him 25 grand in his bank, especially when the amount of drugs that I could sniff, that wasn't a good combination. So that's how naive I was to the whole process. So they were like, "No, you ring the rehab, right? And then we've obviously allocated you a place. You phone them up, you have the interview with them." Which was more like, it wasn't a selection process. You tell them about your habits and how much you use in a day, and sort of give them a story of, well, tell them how bad of a drug addict you are. And that, I remember I spoke to a lady called Elizabeth who worked for Phoenix Futures, and we had the assessment. And I remember just crying on the phone, and I was like, "Look, I weigh 6 stone. I need help. I'm literally going to kill myself. I need to get in." And they phoned me back up, I think the next day, and they gave me the news that I could go to rehab. They gave me a date, and I turned around and I said, "Oh, can I make it?" I think they said on the Monday, and it was my sister's birthday, I think, on one day that week. And I was like, "Oh, can I come on the Friday?" But the real reason, it was also my sister's, but I'll be completely honest, the real reason was because I wanted another week of using drugs, because I was shit scared of stopping. And I knew I got paid as well. I still technically got paid from my employer, the commission and stuff that I was owed, and I knew that I was going to get X amount of money. So I knew that I could buy more drugs to take me to rehab. And I remember the day I went into rehab, the day before I went into rehab, I went and I bought an ounce off this guy that I used to buy Ket off. And I still speak to him today, not as much, but like, regardless of him being a drug addict, you know, he's not a bad person, you know. And he looked at me and he gave me the ounce. I paid for it, and I always used to get a quart off him at least every day. So he then pulled out like 7 gram, and he like looked at me and he was ketty. I was like in a lot of pain, still slightly ketty, and I went, "Oh no, I don't want that. I've ordered like an ounce, so I don't need the quart." And he was like, "Are you going to rehab tomorrow?" And I went, "Yeah." And he went, "Really?" And I went, "Yeah." And he went, "Just take it and like, let's just never see me again for drugs, mate." And he looked at me and he went, "Look, mate, please go and sort your life out, because you're better than this. You're better than it." And I remember that conversation, and I was like, it's probably more. It probably gets me more emotional now thinking about it than I did when I was there, because I was like, "Give me fucking drugs. I want to get off." And so I had an ounce and a quarter, which is 35 gram. And I picked that up at 4:00 Thursday evening. And I snorted my last line at 10 a.m. the next morning, as I got picked up from the train station in Annisland. So you guys are from Glasgow, so you'll know where Annisland is. Yeah. And I caught a taxi at 7 a.m. I missed my first train, which wasn't my fault. It was because of the taxi driver. I was ready. And I remember all that night, I didn't sleep a wink. I wanted to spend it with my mum, but I also wanted to sniff all those drugs. And like within, I don't know, what's that, from 12 hours, 16 hours, I sniffed 35 gram.
Fucking hell.
And I travelled from Thurnscote, Barnsley. I caught a taxi to Doncaster, a train from Doncaster to York to Newcastle to Edinburgh to Glasgow to Annisland. And then I got picked up from the staff at Annisland train station, and I sniffed all that amount of Ket, and still functioned, still caught the trains, still could speak. But I cried a lot of it, you know. And I took a picture, and I don't know why I took a picture, but this is sort of I'm going to show you the picture, which is sort of what went viral. And I took a picture of the day I went into rehab, about 5:00 in the morning, full of ketamine. And I think I took it because at the time I didn't think I was that bad. I knew I was fucked, but I didn't think I was actually that bad. And I took this picture and I was like, I think I took it because I wanted to see myself, what I'd look like in 6 months' time.
Yeah.
And so like, this is actually, I don't know if you can see that.
Jesus.
But that's what I look like. So,
wow.
That was me. Good 6-pack though.
Smashing cheekbones, mate. Smashing cheekbones.
Yeah, I had about 0.6% body fat, and yeah, I was fucked, you know. And that, when I look at that picture, like I'm a public speaker, and I go around and I talk to people about my experience, and I show them that picture because they genuinely can't believe that I used to be a drug addict. And when I use the word junkie, like I properly mean junkie. I was fucked. But even in that picture, I didn't think I was that bad. You know, I knew my life was chaotic. I knew I was going to die, and I was quite happy to die. But I didn't realize how. Like, I remember trying to sleep, and I used to have to. This is really embarrassing, but I used to have to piss and shit in a bucket in my bedroom because I couldn't even get out. I couldn't walk down the stairs. I couldn't sleep because all of my bones. I could feel everything, and I looked like someone from Auschwitz. You know, I might have dressed nice. I had a decent. I've always been cool. But I've always had. All right. Well, some people think I'm fucking weird, but like I've always sort of prided myself on my appearance, and which is wrong. I get that. But I used to think I looked all right. You know, even at that, I thought I was all right. You know, and people would think, fucking hell. Like, and I can remember, like my old employers when I went into rehab. And like rehab is crazy. I cannot explain rehab. Like I've always wanted, if I could buy the rights to film rehab and make like a Big Brother, it would be by far the most successful show on earth. Like, because the stuff that goes off in rehab is fucking insane. Like insane. Like I never saw heroin until I went to rehab. You know, I never took heroin. I never took crack. Even I've got judgment towards that, even looking like that. You know, I'm like, oh, I won't take, smack's bad, you know, but ketamine. And what I quickly realised was when I went into rehab, there's no such thing as even though even addicts give themselves a hierarchy of addict, but I used to get bullied. You know, I got bullied in rehab by some of the staff, not necessarily physically bullied, but I'd always have like snide remarks. Especially from other residents, and they'd be like, oh, you're not a fucking junkie, you know, you've still got your teeth and you've got nice hair. And I even looking like that, and I was like, well, what do you need to qualify as a junkie? Like, what is there like a selection process, or is there a tick box exercise that I need to tick, like stab someone, tick, lived homeless, tick,
robbed a granny, tick,
sold my arsehole, tick. Do you know what I mean? It's like, what the fuck? Like, what do you need to have done? I've been to prison for a 5-year stretch, tick, slash someone, tick, been to an old firm day. Like, I'm being stereotypical, but you know, like,
it seems like it's like, see if you could quantify it as like football. It's like there was like you've just qualified, right? You've made it to the group stage, my man, right? But getting out of that group stage is a bastard. You've got the heavy hitters are in the group stage.
See, for me, I would say it's more like being a Cub Scout.
Badges. Well, I've got my heroin badge. I've got my ketamine badge. I've got my 6 zone badge.
You've no got the lost your teeth badge. So
yeah, sorry. I do. But yeah, like I'll be completely honest. Like when I went into rehab, although I looked like that, and I really looked bad. Like I looked far worse than someone with like a 10-year smack habit, for example. Yeah. And I would get heroin users turn around to me and go, "Fuck off, ketamine!" Like talking out the side of the mouth like they do, and I'd be like, "What?" Because for literally about 3 weeks, I didn't understand anybody. Like Scott, like I did not understand a thing, which was quite. Thinking back now was probably a good thing because they were all probably really nasty to me and I didn't understand it, so it was great. I'd be like, oh yeah, thank you, and they'd probably just call me a cunt, and I didn't know what they were saying. But I remember like heroin addicts used to look at me and go, fuck off, I took ketamine in P1. And I'm like, this isn't a competition, mate. Like, and I look worse than you. Like, I'm fucked. You're fat. How can you be a fat heroin addict?
I know.
You know what I mean?
How can you be a fat heroin addict?
I'll ask him.
Just injecting heroin with one arm and saturated fat in the other arm.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, and I used to get like, oh, he's not you don't deserve to be here. I used to get that comment a lot from one guy in particular. It's a fucking arsehole. And, you know, I'm not going to claim to be, you know, Gandhi or, you know, just drug guru. I'm a human being. You know, I don't hate everybody, but sometimes I look at people and I have resentment. Yeah, of course. And quite rightly so. You know, I'm not like Jesus. I'm not like a fat version of Jesus, but like, I'm not, you know, I don't forgive everybody. I can't walk on water. But like, yeah, I used to get like people look at me and go, "Fuck off! You don't deserve to be here. Like, you shouldn't be here." And I'd be like, "Fucking hell! Like, this is not my first day." And then, like, I can remember, like, it was quite funny. Like, some of it was funny. Like, don't get me wrong. And you know, and I'm eternally grateful for the opportunity of going to rehab. But please don't be fooled and think, "Oh, rehab cures everybody," because it doesn't. And I went to what's called a therapeutic community. So it's not a 12-step model. It's more probably smart recovery based. And obviously there's a lot of therapeutic activities that we do. So we do the cooking, the cleaning, the mopping, the admin, the sort of layout of the week. We do all the planners, obviously with the staff being involved, but it's us that effectively run the house. And we used to get people from prison go to rehab, and they'd last like 2 days and think, "Fuck this, like, prison's easier." You know, you have no phone, no Instagram, no fucking selfies, no Twitter, no Facebook, nothing. You won't have you do not have a clue what goes off in the outside world. And that's quite a good thing, you know, and I agree with that. You know, you're going in there to work on yourself and to do a job, you know, you're going in there to sort your life out and change your life. And for me, like, I went into rehab and I made some amazing friends, and I made some enemies as well. And, you know, and it's weird because you all imagine rehab to be like this fun loving place and everyone's in this together. And like, I probably speak to about 5 or 6 people now from rehab, like 2.5 years ago. A lot of them are dead, unfortunately. Most of them are still fucked using drugs. You know, and that's tragic. But I tell you that because I don't want, people have this, I think, this generalized conception of, you go to rehab and you're cured. You know, you go see a doctor and he makes you better. You go to rehab and you're not a drug addict anymore. And I wish that was the truth. Because I wouldn't probably know 40 or 50 people now that are dead. You know, I wouldn't know fucking probably a few hundred that are fucked, you know, that will be dead probably before this year is out. You know, and that's tragic, you know, because addiction isn't, you know, I try and have a laugh and a joke, but addiction isn't a joke, you know, it's fucking serious. In Scotland, obviously being the drug capital of Europe. And it's funny because I got asked to write an article when I was coming sort of towards the end of my program in rehab, and I wrote this article and it got posted on Facebook and it went viral. And I think those pictures were attached to it. And that's how like Lad Bible happened, because some of the producers saw it. And I didn't have Facebook because I was in rehab. So they were trying to track me down. And luckily they contacted someone that had shared it and said, "Do you know this person?" And she was like, "Actually, I do, yeah." And they hooked me up. And then I went and made a Lad Bible video. And then sort of from that, like I left rehab in February last year. 2020, and I did the Lad Bible thing in November. Well, I think I did it the month before, and it aired in November. And like in the past, since sort of Lad Bible, like I'd got a lot of local sort of attention, like media attention, especially because the drug debate in Scotland is so prevalent. You know, you've got the highest drug death in Europe. You've got probably per capita one of the worst drug problems in the world, and sort of like my story has, and I don't do the 12 steps. I don't do fellowship. I've tried it. I didn't like it. It wasn't for me, but I wouldn't advise no one not to go and try it. You know, it's not for me. I think it's a bit of a cult. And I think, you know, labeling addiction as a disease, I think has more of a detrimental impact than actually saying, "No, you've not got a disease. You know, this is actually why you turn to addiction." It might be, and then one thing every addict shares in common is trauma. You know, there's an amazing guy called Gabor Mate that does so much research into it, and we all share a common theme, which is pain and suffering. You know, and I think it's stupid and very ignorant to tell someone that they've got a disease. And the amount of people that I see that are part of the fellowship constantly tell themselves that they've got this sickness and this disease, and it's like, well, how the fuck are you ever going to get better? Yeah. You know, I'm not an addict anymore. I'm not going to go and snort ketamine again or coke or drink because I don't need to, because I don't want to. Yeah. Whereas just because like I wouldn't necessarily say I'm cured. I've still got a lot of work, like psychological aspect wise, a lot of trauma to deal with. But my life's far, far better than it ever has been. I don't have the big fancy career like I used to in a beautiful apartment, but I'm grateful for what I've got now. I'm extremely grateful for what I've got. And I think, with addiction being viewed as a disease by so many, I think it's not a good thing. I recently bought a book by a fantastic guy who basically, I've not read it yet, so I'm not going to lie and say I've read it. I only bought it last week, but it's actually a guy called Mark David Lewis, and it basically reveals that the basic problem is that we've sort of tried to categorize addiction, and we do that by saying and by labeling it as a disease, and it has such an impact on, it's such a negative connotation to tell someone you've got a disease. If you came to me and I went, "Oh, you've got a disease, you're fucked for life," you'd probably be like, especially when you look like that and you're a junkie, you'd probably be like, "Oh, fuck it, why should I stop?"
Yeah.
Okay.
I've got a disease. And most people...
It's not my fault, it's the disease.
I'm glad you said... I hear that all the time.
Yeah.
And people use it as an excuse. I've heard people talk, and they've talked about battering the girlfriends and stealing the kids and going and using and dying in front of them and being brought back to life. And he finished it by saying, "But I've got a disease." And I was like, for fuck's sake, you can't, you take no responsibility at all for your actions. And it's like, and I don't necessarily think the steps are a bad, I don't necessarily think they are bad. I think the principles of the step process, I think some of them are very valuable, and some of them I incorporate into my recovery. But the whole, I mean, most of them probably hate me anyway, because I publicly talk about how I don't think it's a great thing. But I wouldn't advise someone not to try it, and I do believe when I tried it, there was some meetings that were fantastic. I felt a sense of connection and a part of something. But for me, I think I've always tended to do stuff better on my own. And it's not that I'm not a team player, but my recovery is a very personal and spiritual experience. It's my path. It's not yours. It's mine. It's like, if you were in recovery, your recovery is probably different than mine, and there's not just like this thumbprint of how, you do this, you do that, you do that, and that's it, you're cured. And that's not how, I wish it did work like that, because addiction wouldn't be so bad. But
what would you say, how the whole being an addict is viewed as a disease seems to be the kind of primary argument for decriminalizing drugs and making it. I mean, we spoke to Aidan about this as well, about the situation in Portugal and how the numbers have fallen through the floor. But it seems to be propped up by, addiction is a disease, so it should not be treated as a criminal offence. What's your opinions on that?
So I was in Parliament when they did the substance debate. So when Parliament had the substance debate last year, I got invited in to take, not to take part, but to sit there and watch and sort of give my opinions on it. So everyone has this misconception of when we say we decriminalise drugs, that doesn't mean you can't walk around with a kilo of coke in your boot.
No,
It's legal, it's fine. Come on. Yeah. So what it actually does is so at the moment, having an addiction is demonized and viewed as a criminal offence, because what we tend to do is, especially people in power, people in Parliament, they assume, because of stigma, that there's a lot of criminality involved in addiction. And there is. I've talked about my story, and a lot of it, for a short period of time, was heavily involved in criminal activities, whether I like to admit it or I'm proud of it. But I think how they view addiction and how they treat addiction, more importantly, how they treat it, is far better. It shouldn't be deemed as revolutionary, even though it is. And I think Sweden have done something similar as well. So rather than, say you got caught with 3 or 4 grams of ketamine or cocaine, for example, rather than going to court, getting a criminal record, potentially looking at jail time, if you had a job, potentially losing your job, having this label then against your name saying that you've got a criminal record for drugs. So obviously when you're DBS checked, or when you, or you guys call it something different up here, But when you go through like a security check to get a job, say for example you work with kids, whatever it may be, you'd have this charge against your name. So most people wouldn't employ someone that had been caught with possession, for example. So what they do is, in Portugal, if you get caught with cocaine or whatever, rather than going through that costly procedure, they'll send you to a doctor. The doctor might say, right, okay, I think you've got some deeper underlying traumatic issues or a lot of issues that you need to deal with, some underlying core issues, for example. And then they'll send you off to a psychiatrist, psychologist. You might even send you to rehab for 3 months. So that would be, so rather than viewing it, and this is how we currently view addiction as a criminal offense, because we demonize it like that. So they look at it and go, well, actually, there's something wrong with you because no one really should be doing that, you know. And if you ask a proper junkie, do they enjoy their lives? I imagine they'll say no.
Yeah.
Every single fucking person will say no, because being a junkie is not easy. You know, it's not. Like, it's not. So they'll rather than punishing you, they look at it and go, right, well, we're going to offer you this form of treatment. And then, you know, you go to treatment, you might go to rehab. They might even keep your job on hold and sort of integrate you slowly back into your workplace when you come out. And that's far better. And what it also does is it sort of puts the conversation out there about addiction, you know, like it opens it up for a conversation or a debate, you know. Right, okay, well, I use drugs because I had a lot of deep underlying issues, a lot of trauma, a lot of adverse childhood experiences, which are called ACEs in the field. You know, and I never knew that over the years that developed, and it gave me all these insecurities. And when I actually started using drugs and properly using drugs, I was actually doing it to suppress how I felt. Yeah. Rather than going to a psychiatrist and talking about my problems, I turned to drugs. And I think, you know, if you look, for example, if you look at COVID, the addiction has increased drastically. Yeah. You know, alcohol is on the, like, I was listening to some music before we started this, and all the adverts on YouTube were alcohol, which was weird. And I was like, that's a sign. I was like, so what the fuck? And, you know, like alcohol is so socially acceptable. You know, if they sold ketamine in Tesco's, I probably wouldn't be going to Tesco's every week because that would be a massive trigger. So like if you're an alcoholic, for example, it must be so hard to get away from something that's so legal and so shoved in your face. Yeah. You know, if you look at football, it's advertised, you know, the alcohol industry spends billions of pounds a year on advertising. If your product is so good, you don't need to spend billions of fucking pounds a year. Yeah. You know, and I think that the damage that is, in particular alcohol, the effects and the burden it places upon the NHS is probably one of the main factors why most people are in A&E at the weekend. Yep. You know, and then long-term damage, psoriasis of the liver, the kidneys, heart failure, cholesterol, fat, you know, it damages, it has your brain, you know, and drugs do that as well. And I deem alcohol as a drug as well. But, you know, we live in a society that we constantly are trying to find this sort of vice to medicate ourselves. Yeah. You know, most people don't enjoy what they do for a living, or, you know, I'm getting deep about our societal problems, but we don't live in a great world. You know, there's a lot of inspiration and a lot of beautiful, amazing things that happen in the world, but there's also a lot of darkness as well. You know, life isn't always great. Yeah. And then when you think about mental health and depression, that's on the rise. You know, social media glorifying all of our best lives. You know, we live in this consumeristic world that we're constantly bombarded with information that you're shit. You know, another pair of trainers will make you feel better, or you're not driving the latest Merc or BMW. You know, you'd be much better with a Rolex as opposed to something else. You know, and it's like we're constantly bombarded with these subliminal messages telling us how shit we are. You know, how worthless we are. Oh, but we'll be better if we get, you know, the latest car, or we live in a detached house with a white picket fence and the 2 kids and all that. And it's like we constantly are preyed upon to feel worthless, you know, so someone can sell us something. Yeah.
I think it's got more intense, because I think historically you got adverts when you watched the television or in a newspaper, or when, you know, you're in a car and it's a billboard. That was it. But now, every 3 photographs you scroll through on Instagram, bang, there's some bud with big tits fucking try to punt you something, going, you're never going to get a bird like me unless you get one of these. Do you know what I mean?
And like, Yeah, and data's worth more than oil now. Like we'll look at all the people like Zuckerberg, Bezos. You know, they're rich because they own data, and like information is power. You know, you think about the government. We talk about like there's a lot of philosophers that talk about knowledge is power, and it really is, because if I know what you're doing all the time, I can sell you shit based upon your behaviors, your activities, where you are, what you're doing, you know, and we are a commodity, you know, even more so now than we ever have been. And, you know, that's pretty sad, grim aspect of life. But, you know, it's a reality in most aspects. But yeah, so it's like, it's weird because like with my journey, you know, I talk about addiction all the time, and I deleted social media. I was in a relationship not long ago, and it ended. And it wasn't, for the first time in my life, it didn't end dramatically, and I wasn't unfaithful, or I wasn't a druggie, or, you know, it actually just we just sort of realized that we weren't necessarily on the same page. And for the first time, I went through a breakup, and it was quite like an adult grown up thing, you know. I don't hate her, although it'd probably be easier sometimes if I did, you know, but like I don't. And it's like, well, do you know what? Sometimes things don't work out. And normally I'd have dealt by that by going and buying fuck knows how much ket. And, you know, oh, I'm not good enough and all this. And now I think, well, do you know what? You know, I'm not a bad person, I don't think. And, you know, I'm on this journey, and she is on her journey. And she wasn't in recovery like me, and she wasn't a druggie either. So I was... I picked the female version of this, and I was like, you know, and it's weird because
just worse hair.
Is that why you broke up? Hair envy.
Yeah, his teeth weren't as good as mine. No, but no, it was like, yeah, it was just one of them things, and as you know, as unfortunate and as upsetting and heartbreaking as it was, again, I dealt with it the right way, and I'm quite spiritual. You know, I believe that the universe is always trying to show us a lesson, and you might not see that lesson at first. You know, you might think, oh, fuck, like, this is horrible. But then, like, you sort of reflect back and look, and, you know, and I think for two people to truly work out, you know, everything has to be bang on. And you know, my recovery is a huge part of my life. And I think sometimes it can be a bit much. You know, I don't drink. You know, I can be a bit socially awkward if I went to a barbecue and everyone's getting pissed and I'm like, I'm the junkie off the telly, and I don't drink, and everyone's like, and it's weird because like people always ask me, do I drink? You know, and I don't drink. You know, I wasn't really a particularly big drinker anyway. But people will be like, yeah, but you weren't an alcoholic. And I'm like, well, I wasn't a fucking crackhead either, but like, so if I did crack on a weekend, is that, you know, like even like I had to explain that to my own mum once, and she was like, my mum knows I don't really drink anyway, but my mum thought it might have been all right. My mum doesn't drink. And I was like, Mum, if I ever drink, like, I need help, like, because I won't be able, and my problem is with addictive substances is once I pop, I can't stop. and that, like, that's with food, that's with sex, it's porn, it's fucking shopping, it's anything. Like, I can get extremely addicted to it. So I have to be quite mindful. I mean, like, sex probably isn't going to kill you, right?
Don't know, mate. I give it a good go myself.
As much as you try, like, you know, sex, even though, like, obviously it's COVID and everything, and I'm still in a romantically difficult place, and I'm like, that's what I want to do.
Romantically difficult. I love that.
Romantically difficult.
I'd probably cry. I'd be like, oh, my last girlfriend thought I wasn't gonna. No, and it was like, it's just like the whole world of dating. It's such a weird world, I think, as well. And it's like, you know, in COVID, it's hard to date, and I'm not particularly eager to date and stuff like that. But it is difficult, you know. It's most of the time in the past I used to go out and date. I'd be ketty, you know, and for me, oh god, this is so embarrassing. But I remember having, I hope maybe the girl in question doesn't watch this, but I remember the first time having sex in recovery when I was clean and sober. I was fucking shit scared, like absolutely, like, and I never had sex sober or clean. Like I'd always had sex drunk or fucked out of my face. And half the time I'd have to have sex with him in the morning just to remember that I actually had sex, because I was like, fucked both ways. And, you know, I was like, sex is is an exchange of energy. You know, sex can be, you know, it can be whatever else as well. But like sex for me, especially now, it's quite more of a romantic viewpoint, I think, on sex. And it's an emotional exchange of connection. And it's like, you can't just go out and have sex with a girl and not feel like some form of connection. And before that was quite the opposite. I could go out and have sex with someone, a complete stranger, but I couldn't sit in bed and talk to him, or and I'd always be off my face. So, like I don't know how dating is now, but like when I used to date before I was clean and sober, you'd go out, you'd get smashed, and hopefully you'd end up back at yours or back at hers. And that's really what dating was about, and even dating, it's completely addictive. We constantly want self-gratification, and we constantly seek people's approval. And it's like another thing that you chase, and it's quite difficult. Everybody has their vices. And I work with loads of people that ketamine necessarily isn't their addiction. Some of them are porn, some of them are sex. And I think sometimes in the past as well, for me, I used to use sex as a tool. If I felt shit about myself, I remember actually having sex and I looked like that. And it was fucking awkward. So awkward.
She throwing you about,
yeah, pulling my hair. And I remember, like, we actually stopped. She was like, "You've lost loads of weight." And I was like, fucking hell, it's awkward. But I was like, surely it makes my penis maybe look bigger. Like, no. She was like, no, it doesn't. But I was like, it's like, sex for me was a way of making myself feel better about myself. Mm-hmm. And it's quite easy to do that. It's quite easy to go out and have sex with someone, especially from like a lad standpoint, that, that's cool, and it's not. And I was probably as much addicted to that form of addiction as I was ketamine. It went hand in hand. And I think now when I'm clean and sober, and sex for me is a big deal. Like, it sounds really weird, but it is, and it is weird because, like, in the world now, like, you go out dating and most people go out and they drink, and I don't drink, and sometimes it can. I think my mate's girlfriend, I think she tried to not drink because of me, and she wasn't an addict. She has a very successful career. She's an amazing woman regardless of her career, and just because I don't do drugs or drink, it doesn't mean that someone else can't drink. I've got friends that do coke, and I don't lecture them because it's not necessarily a problem. Only if you're an addict. If you can get up and go to work or do whatever. I was going to say go to school then, but yeah, I mean, there are children unfortunately trapped by addiction. But like, just because I don't drink or I don't do drugs doesn't mean that the whole world shouldn't drink or do drugs. And I had that view when I first got into recovery. I was like, I'm pure. Everyone else is tainted because they drink or they do drugs. And now my view is like, if you do drugs and you can enjoy your life and, provide for your family or whatever, that's fine. I'm not going to lecture you about that. Mm-hmm. If people drink and they enjoy it, then that's fine. But for me, I don't, because I won't enjoy it. I'll fuck my life up and probably be dead within a few months, and for me, it's pretty simple. I don't need to believe in God or my higher power or the steps or fucking whatever else. And, for me, if I use drugs, I die. Simple as that. And I keep it that simple.
It's quite funny you mentioned the higher power thing, because I think there is a similarity between you and Aidan. In a lot of ways.
It's going to kill you for saying that.
But I think there is a lot of similarities, because you were talking about it, like, Aidan was just addicted to everything. Do you know what I mean? Mm. And I think what you were saying there, there was whether it's drink or whether you were fucking smoking crack or smoking fags, I don't know what it was, but you were going to be addicted to it, and I think he's very much in that camp. And I also think it's Aidan and you, I see a real similarity, because the two of you are very high functioning individuals who have just seemed to have fallen foul of addiction, but have had the presence of mind in that stupor, that ketamine, alcohol, cocaine thing that was for him, to actually have something, a wee light go on and go, fuck this. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And maybe people who are not as high function probably wouldn't have that, to use one of Chris's phrase, condor moment. That he didn't realise that a condor was actually a bird, and it means like a bird's eye view, but he still...
All right.
Yeah. Anyway.
See, there you go.
How did you not know that, mate? A condor moment. It's like when you're up high looking down on yourself. Anyway. But if you didn't have that, mental acuity, then you might not have been able to pull yourself out of it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Maslow's theory of needs. So when we talk about like self-actualization, obviously being at the top of the pyramid, like that's how I view it. You know, I've reached a certain level of my life where I'm starting to become sort of self-aware, and I think I started this like when I sort of realized that I don't want to die a drug addict, and I don't deserve my family to have a son or a brother to have died, or an uncle, you know. And I've got a beautiful little niece now, and she'll never know that junky little uncle, you know. And unfortunately, my nephew does, but my nephew's got me now, you know. And I try not to live too much in the past unless I'm looking back to see a lesson or to learn from it. And I try and live in the present moment, you know. That's all we've got. And I've got an amazing mentor, a guy called Jerry Murphy, and he does the steps, and he's wrote his own book as well, which is a fantastic book called Now I Understand. And when I've read that, I plugged it then, and I didn't mean to sound cheesy when I did that, but I was just Aidan's got a book as well. I'm also in a book at the minute in Waterstones. But yeah, like, but it's like, I don't see. The thing is as well about Aidan is the fact that I really respect his recovery, because although we don't have the same path, we respect each other's. I respect him for what he does. I respect his recovery, and he respects mine. And we have some of the most interesting conversations about addiction. And we'll have an argument, but like in a nice way, you know. And we respect each other's way of recovering. I sort of believe that my higher power is my inner child. So I don't necessarily think that higher power is bullshit. But when I do things, or when I meditate, or when I pray, I sort of talk to my inner child. And I think that for me helps sort of, when I talk about that process of self-actualization, I sort of try and forgive that inner child, and sort of like, you're not actually worthless. You're not a piece of shit. You know, I know you've been through a lot, but it wasn't necessarily your fault. And I'm not trying to say, oh, everything you did in addiction, it was a disease's fault. It was fucking my fault. But I try and learn to have a bit of self-practice. And, you know, I think my time in rehab taught me resilience. In particular, like to sort of reach that moment of self-actualization. And that's what sort of life is about, you know. There's nothing more powerful than someone who knows who they are and what they want in life. Yeah. It's just a shame it's took me like 34 years to reach it. Most people get it early on, but I don't. But I think a lot of high-functioning people, drug addicts, see, and this is where the stigma comes in. Not everybody that lives on the street, you know, not every drug addict lives on the streets of Glasgow for it. And I know that statement's tragic and sort of sounds nasty, but most people with addictions are doctors, lawyers, teachers, and there's some people that I know that have those careers. You know, highly functioning people have addictions. I mean, how do you think they afford it? You know, not everybody's out begging for money for crack. You know, and not everybody that is begging for money is also in the same respect begging for crack.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I don't know everybody's circumstances or their situation, but most people that do drugs, I think, do have careers, do have families, you know, are the person next door, are your neighbour, are your friend, you know. And I think when we sort of realise that and have that discussion around addiction, I think then only then really can we sort of view it and sort of help treat it. Because the way things are going at the moment, you know, it's not looking good. Not looking, and I hate sounding like such a pessimist, but it's not. You know, the problem isn't going to get better. Drug dealers are becoming clever, more and more clever. You know, like Snapchat. Fucking hell, like I don't have Snapchat and or TikTok or anything like that. I have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and don't really use them anymore. But like I never, when I used to buy drugs, it was some dodgy guy
in a car park
down an alley. Yeah, and I was, and drug dealers never fucking delivered drugs when I was a drug dealer. Like, or when I took drugs, you'd rarely get it delivered. You had to go and get it. It was like, oh fucking. Now, like people are on Snapchat, like 3 for 50 deals, ketamine, all the prescribed drugs, which are all fake. You know, coke, crack, heroin, whatever you want. You know, you don't have to download an app. Snapchat, boom, you know, you could get drugs delivered in 20 minutes.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, in Scotland, they did a test and they said you can get drugs delivered quicker than you can get a pizza. That is a crippling.
Probably cheaper too.
I know. You're probably buy a Domino's.
Papa John's. But yeah, like it's, you know, it's weird, the whole sort of world of recovery. And you know, and I think because Glasgow has such a prevalent drug problem, in relation to that, sort of in a direct correlation, you also have a huge recovery community, you know, and there's a lot of people out there that are doing a lot of good, you know, and trying, but then there's also a lot of fakes, you know, there's a lot of people in recovery that claim to be in recovery that drink or fucking still do drugs. And it's like, for me, that's why I sort of stay away from, my recovery is my own, you know, as long as I remain true to myself and do what I do, then I'm happy with that. You know, I try not to get involved in other people's business, although sometimes I do. But it's, yeah, my life's not as bad as it used to be anyway. So that's
I think
so. What's next? What does the future hold?
So, so I need to get into shape because my story's sort of travelled across the globe, and I've been quite fortunate to have the attention, the media, not so much the attention. I've been very fortunate to have the opportunity to have my story out there to offer hope and inspiration. Yeah. Although sometimes when I get people going, "You're that junkie off Lad Bible," it's a little bit awkward in the street on Sucky Old Street, and someone shouting it out. Or "You're that shit version of Russell Brand," or whatever. I get trolled a bit sometimes, and I'm like, I'm cheaper. I wasn't ever Shagger of the Year though.
I was fucking affordable.
And I never
I would say affordable. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I'm like the Fisher Price version of.
You're a pound land Russell Brand.
That's my new slogan, though. But like it's, you know, like, well, I'm attempting. So I need to get into shape this year. So once the gym's open back up, and once I get off my ass and get out there and actually do it. So I've set myself a goal to climb Mount Everest in 2023. So you can only climb it. Yeah, you can only climb it between April and May. Mm-hmm. So you only get a 8 week period, and it takes around about 50, 60 days to get to the top. So ironically, although it's going to cost probably in the region of excess of 50, 60,000 pounds, 70,000 pounds. Yeah. Raising the money, I don't think will be the hard part, because I've been fortunate to have the exposure that I've had. Like, my story has been shared to over 100 million people. So like, I've had a lot of exposure, so I can use that, and I can sell myself pretty well. So I can use that to get the financial backing, and I've already got a plan in mind for that. But I want to climb Mount Everest, and the reason why I want to do it, most people that climb Everest is purely egotistical, and I understand that, and that is an amazing achievement, whether it's driven by ego or a purpose or whatever. To climb the highest mountain in the world for me is to prove to everyone that's suffering with addiction, and to me it's quite symbolic of what recovery represents.
It's a
so when I was a junkie, I'd look at people that are clean and think, I can never do that. You know, I'll try it tomorrow. And one of the things that I learned, you know, about getting into recovery, that it is possible, but it's possible because you have to work your fucking ass off. You know, you have to have the self-belief, the self-belief. And no matter how, like, hundreds of people laughed at me when I said I was going to rehab, you know, people would take the piss out of me behind my back, to my face, post statuses about it. You know, people took the piss out of me going to rehab. You know what? Like, them people aren't fucking laughing now. Do you know what I mean? Like, them people are probably still sat there now snorting ketamine, fucked. You know, their arsehole hanging out, the bladder fucking being pissed out of the urethra. And those things do happen, by the way. You know, it happened with me. You know, they're not laughing now. You know, those same people that took the piss out of me are the people that are messaging me at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning begging me for help. You know, and I don't mean that from a sense of arrogance. I'm just trying to say it like, you know, getting clean isn't easy. You know? There's a lot of people that will hate you for trying to better yourself. And because I've had such a exciting journey, you know, some people are jealous by that. You know, and that sounds arrogant, but like, you know.
Well, it's an achievement in itself. It is an achievement. Do you know what I mean? And people, and you know yourself, the people are when they see somebody else doing really well, they see it as a reflection on their own inactivity and their own achievements. Do you know what I mean? And if you're fucking talking about climbing Everest, and these wee guys, the fucking biggest mound they'll ever do is taking off a card on a Friday night. Do you know what I mean?
I'm not going to do it on drugs though, obviously. I'm not going to be snorting ketamine as a step.
Just 4 tugs and a wee sharper's rope. What are you doing?
Trying to defrost it in my groin.
Putting it as an ice cube in your water.
But like I know, so I talked to a guy called, I've sort of been in conversation with a guy called Conrad Anker, who is like the David Beckham of the mountaineering world. Like he is. I was in the newspaper not long ago, so like I've been fortunate. I've been in pretty much every newspaper that's out, Glaswegian and national. I've been in the Epoch Times, which is one of New York's best-selling newspapers as well. Like I've had my story share far and wide. Which is amazing because I hope that someone looks at it and thinks, fuck him, like if he can do it, I can do it. And that's all I want. That's all I want. Yeah. So I want to climb Everest to show people that, do you know what, no matter how many people, because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are looking or that will watch this and think, who fucking not did that? And in 2 years' time, hopefully we can have this chat again and I'll be like, well, they're not fucking laughing now, are they? Yeah. I've lost 3 fingers. In my leg.
Your nose has been fucking frostbitten.
My hair's snapped off. But I know you only got to base camp. I didn't even do it. But yeah, so like, I'm fortunate enough where I do think I've got the right interest in people backing me. And there's a lot of hard work, but like anything, if you've got a plan, as long as you've got the right self-belief and the willpower to get off your ass and go and achieve it, then, the world is your oyster. And I think for me, it symbolizes perfectly what recovery is, no matter how many people laugh at you, no matter how impossible it seems. And you make all these excuses like, I haven't got the kit. An oxygen tank's about 800 quid. I'll probably need about 10. So I'm talking about like nearly 8 grand in just fucking oxygen. There's all these things that I have to hit and achieve in order for me to do it. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly like recovery. There was all these sort of tick box exercise, if you look at it like that, there was all these things that I had to go through to get clean. And it's the exact same for recovery. I am after going to go through pain and through hell, through hell and back to do this. And I want to be stood at the top of that mountain. And I believe in manifestation and visualizing stuff a lot. And yeah, when I do it, and as much as I want to do it as well for me, don't get me wrong, but I want to do it so someone hears about it or looks at it and thinks, fuck it. What? Like him, like that guy there, like that 6-stone wreckhead, got clean and then 2 years later went and climbed the highest mountain in the world, and that to me, that if that's not inspiration for people to get better, then, and that's what I want, I can't cure anybody, I fucking wish I could, it'd be easy if I could wave a magic wand and go, boom, and you're cured, and that's not how it works. And I truly believe, if you want to change people, you have to start, that's Gandhi quote, you have to start change from within. And I can't change anybody. All I can do is inspire people. And that's how I want to, that's how I sort of want to live the rest of my life, by creating opportunities for people to change themselves. And I think, I'm a student as well. And the course that I'm doing, I'm going to uni next year. So I'll actually be in uni as hopefully I'm going to climb Everest, which is again, another challenge that I'll have to overcome. But all of these goals, it's only human beings that are doing it. I mean, very super fit, rich human beings, but there's nothing that they've got that I haven't, And when I mentioned Conrad Anker, I talked to him. So he's the world leading expert. Like there's loads of YouTube, there's Netflix documentaries on him. He's only one of 4 people to climb Meru. The guy is a legend, a living legend. And, he messaged me ironically on the day I went into rehab when I was on the train. And there was a story in there was an article in one of the newspapers about how we formed this friendship. Because like a proper fanboy, I opened up to him and I was like, I'm a fucking drug addict. You're so inspirational, like while I'm climbing mountains on Ket. And I didn't tell him that. But like he messaged me back, and the guy's got fucking millions of followers. The guy is the world leading expert in his field. And he took the time to message me back, and we shared a few inspirational. Like he shares pictures and what he's doing, and he'll ask me if I'm all right. He's invited me to one of his events, but unfortunately I was in rehab, so I didn't get it till I left. I was gutted. But hopefully one day I'll meet him. And I know the right people. Like, I don't know him. I can't He's not my mate. He doesn't live next door. But for me to achieve what I want, I'm certainly surrounding myself with the right people. I've met Molly Hughes, who's I think the youngest and the first female British female to climb Everest from both sides.
Wow.
She also solo skied to the South Pole or the North Pole. Like, the woman's absolutely amazing, you know what I mean? And these are the people that I take inspiration from. You know, I don't necessarily take inspiration from people that are necessarily had the past that I've had. You know, I take inspiration from anything. And hopefully, once I do what I do and what I'm going to set out to achieve, then hopefully people will look at me, especially those that are trapped in addiction, and think, fucking hell, if he can do that, then why can't I do that? You know what? And I don't mean get clean and go and climb Everest, but like, hopefully it might trigger something in their mind and think, if that little junkie can do what he's doing, then I've got no excuse just to go and get clean. You know, and that's all I want. You know, and you know, I can't change anybody. Only stupid, ignorant people think they can change people. Like Hitler, for example, he thought he could change people. Like, to change someone, you can't change. As much as I would love, and I'm a bit of a control freak, as much as I would love to change people, I can't. You know, and my own story has taught me that. You know, I can't change people. All I can do is be an example and inspire others to change. And I think that's not just those in addiction, but anybody that's suffering, you know. And hopefully they can take inspiration from that. But yeah, like I said, I'm also a student. So I'm studying community development. And when I go to uni, I'll be studying community development and business. I'm going to go and get a master's. And then I have an idea of where I want to be. And I'm certainly on the right path to achieve that. Nothing's going to stop me apart from myself. You know, every morning I wake up, I've got a choice, you know, and that's the thing what I don't believe, the whole disease model of addiction. Like, if I want to go and download Snapchat and get a gram of cat after I spoke to you, I can do it. But I don't want to, you know. I want to try and better my life and my family's and everyone that loves and cares for me. Hopefully I can show them the same love and respect that they show for me.
That's admirable, man. That is. I think that's a nice arc. So I think we'll call it an evening there, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thomas, thanks very much for coming on and sharing your story with us. And I've got no doubt that you'll be planting that flag at the top of Everest, man. 100%. I can see it. I can see it.
Good, you can donate. I'll put your logo on it. That's how I'm going to sell it. But no, yeah. The only thing that's stopping me is myself, and that's it. That's when you're an addict. The only thing that's stopping you from getting clean is yourself.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree, man. So I'm going to sign off just now, gentlemen. Thanks very much for listening, folks. Please hit those like and subscribe buttons.